Hi guys, this is Coach Amber from Racket Volleyball and Fistball Club. Today we're going to be going over fistball picking strategies, and we're going to be talking about the zones in serve receive. Now these zones also apply when you're in defense, but the reason why we're specifically saying serve receive is because a lot more athletes may have a difficult time when they're in serve receive, and the reason is because a server has 100% control over their abilities, and if the other team is striking the ball, there's a lot of variables that might happen when they're transitioning from defense to offense. So for example, if you shank your first ball, the setter is going to have a tough time redirecting the ball, which means that a striker now is reacting to a ball that was touched by two other players on their team, versus a server is just serving the ball over the net. They're the one tossing it, they're the one doing the approach or doing the weight transfer or whatever the case is. So whatever the outcome of that serve is solely from that one server versus the striker having to react to a ball that was touched by multiple players. First thing that we want to do is define what an in-system versus an out-of-system ball is. So in-system in sports is where a ball is passed or picked to an area of the field where the setter doesn't have to do a lot of movement or exert a lot of energy to get the ball to the striker zone. And when you are picking the ball, you want to think about the height of your pick, the distance away from the net, and also how easy it is for certain players based on their dominant arm. An out-of-system ball is basically all of the things that can make a play go wrong. So distance away from the net is a big factor that can create an out-of-system ball. So the further away from the net the ball is picked and bouncing for the setter, the more energy that the setter has to use to push the ball forward and get it high enough so then it'll bounce for the strikers. The other thing is that if you're on the sidelines, for example, or the ball is really shooty, that can create a lot of stress for your setter because they have to do a lot more to get under the ball or to redirect the ball into an area that a striker is able to actually strike the ball. So when we talk about zones, there are 4 zones. We do it by letters just because it's a little bit easier to teach. So our in-system letters are zone A and B, and then out-of-system is zone C and D. Now, for some people, zone C may not be an out-of-system area, especially if you're a really good setter, but typically speaking, we want to make it as easy as possible for our setters to be able to set. So we typically say A and B are in-system because it's the least distance that the setter has to set the ball. So zone A is from 1 meter to 5 meters away from the line, so that would be right here. The reason why it's not starting at 0 is because if the ball bounces half a meter or just below the 1 meter line, that increases the chances of it hitting the line when it bounces, and it makes it really hard for the setter to still set that ball without potentially hitting the line when they set it. So that's why it starts at the 1 meter line, because it gives them the ability to set straight up where the striker can strike without their arm hitting the line as well. The big thing with zone A is that this is a zone that the setter is able to do a direct set. And the reason why direct sets are more valuable than bounce sets is because when the ball bounces, there's a chance that it might hit a crater or a soft spot or a hard area or just an area that may make it challenging for the striker to actually get under the ball and hit it. So when it's out of the air, the setter doesn't have to do as much either. They just have to put their arm out, a little bit of motion, and then they just have to create the proper angle with their platform. Versus when they have to send the ball from deeper, now they might have to put a little extra swing on their arm or use their legs a little bit more and create harder angles to basically to create for the ball to get to the front of the field without anybody running into the line or it not bouncing high enough. The next zone is zone B. This is also an in-system zone. This is from 5 meters to 11 meters back. The reason why this is really important is because this zone is still technically in front of the setter. So even if you're in a formation called the X formation, if the ball bounces in this zone off of your pick, the setter still has the ability to run forward to that ball, which means that they have a little bit of that extra momentum. In this zone, typically a setter is going to send a bounce set, but because you're still kind of close to the net, you don't have to send the ball super high to compensate for the distance that you have to send it. So it means that the setters have an easier time getting the set to the correct location because you're not very far back. The other thing is that you're lining up similar to where your striker is also lining up to do their striking approach. So you have an easier time seeing the adjustments that your striker may need to make. The next thing is that you are eventually going to have balls going into zone C. So zone C is where the ball is technically out of system. And for players in a U or a W formation, technically the setter is still coming from behind the ball, but the issue with this zone is that it's now getting into that territory where you may make more mistakes because you're sending the ball further, and the higher you send it, the more the wind is going to affect the ball, and also the more arm swing or leg motion you're going to have to use to get it forward. So if you have an angle change, it's going to be a lot greater the further you are away. So I actually have this right here. And this diagram basically demonstrates what happens to a ball on the same angle, but it's traveling further. So this triangle and this triangle are the same exact angle, but the distance of it is what's determining how much error is on the ball in the trajectory. So if this is where the setter is setting the ball from, this is obviously the line that they would want to try to set, but we're not perfect. We sometimes make mistakes when we're setting. And let's say that this ball is set and it's on a slight angle change. So if the setter is setting and it's all the way from back here, that angle change will create a very, very wide area that the ball can go into, which makes it a lot harder for strikers to get behind the ball. And what happens is over time, the more that the setter is not setting the ball straight and it's going to the sides, it's 10, 15, 20 extra running steps that a striker has to make. And by the end of a game, they're going to be so tired that their strike isn't going to be good, their serve isn't going to be as solid. And also because they're chasing the ball, they're not looking at the defense, which means that their placement for strikes may not be as crisp as if the ball's a lot closer. So if a set is on the 3 meter line, for example, and that's where it's coming from, if that setter makes the same angle error, the error is only about 1 meter to the left or the right, which is a lot easier for a striker to be able to manage when they have to actually strike and adjust to the set. So as you get further away from the net, it means that the strikers have to do a lot more to compensate if the setter isn't able to set the ball straight, which a lot of new setters have a tough time dealing with. The other thing is obviously as the ball is further away, because you might be swinging a little bit more, that may create a lot more topspin and that'll kick the ball forward. So your strikers will have a tough time actually striking because now they're chasing the ball versus the ball coming up over them, bouncing straight up. Now they have the time to actually line up and adjust with that ball. So it's a lot harder the further back the pick is. The last zone is zone D, which is from 18 meters back all the way to 25 plus meters. So the reason why this is not an ideal zone is because the setter is most likely going to have to call for help, and for almost every position, they will have to move backwards to get behind the ball. Another thing is if it's behind the end line, so let's say a back player picks the ball, but it stays behind the end line. Now one of the players is going to have to get under the ball, and because it may come off of the field, if it bounces on the ground, the ball will be dead. So now they're going to have to take it out of the air, which increases the chances of shanking the set. And also now it's not a set, it's more of a recovery play. So we don't want the ball to be behind the end line when you pick the ball. The other thing is, as like we were talking about in zone C, the further away you are, the higher the chances of the ball rolling forward and going into the net or rolling over where the strikers can't get to it. So you want to be really careful with this. The last thing that might happen is because you're so far back, you may want to do a more controlled set. So let's say I set the ball from the 25 meter line, or even let's say the closest to the net, 18 meters back. And say I want to keep it off the net and I put it, we'll say 11 meters back. The left striker or the right striker is now going to have to send the ball 11 meters just to get it over the net, plus whatever distance they're trying to send it. So now they have to work a lot harder to get the ball over, and now it's not a well executed strike, it's just a recovery play. And most of the time when they're sending it, it's going to be high, or it may be a slower ball, or it may land closer to the other side's front end, which means that they have an easier time picking the ball and setting up their offense. So you want to try to send that ball as close as possible, because now your strikers don't have to do as much work to adjust, especially if the setter's having a tough time adjusting. So a big thing to remind you of is when you're picking the ball, you are the one that's setting up our offense. And the further forward you push the ball, the better. Now, this obviously does not discuss if you send a really low ball close to the line or a ball that's really rolly. It needs to be something that's controlled enough that the setter is able to get under. So you obviously need to work with your setters and understand what their strengths and weaknesses are. So if you have a setter that's a little bit slower, you may not want to push the ball right on the line. You may want to keep it a little bit further off, maybe 3 to 6 meters off, because then they'll have an easier time getting under the ball. Versus if you have a faster setter, then they can get under a ball that's 2 to 3 meters off to direct set. So keep this in mind when you guys are practicing picking, and make sure that you have a good idea of where you're trying to place the ball when you are in serve receive and in defense. So thank you so much for watching, and keep watching our series. Bye!